Thousands of years before Egypt's towering monuments scraped the sky, millennia ahead of Greece's marble masterpieces, and ages prior to Rome's legendary stone pathways, something extraordinary was unfolding, deep within a forgotten realm where two mighty waterways carved through ancient soil, the very first sparks of human civilization began to ignite. This mysterious territory, named by Greek scholars as the place between flowing waters, cradled humanity's greatest leap forward. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers thundered down from Turkey's mountain peaks, racing toward the Persian Gulf while sculpting the most fertile lands Earth had ever witnessed. Today we call this region Iraq, but back then it was humanity's launching pad into organized existence. Within these lush valleys, our ancestors achieved what seemed impossible. They abandoned their wandering ways to build permanent homes. They invented symbols that could speak across time. They created rules that governed entire populations. They gazed upward and tried to decode the secrets of stars and planets. Everything we recognize as civilization today sprouted from this extraordinary landscape. Their story stretches across 10,000 incredible years, beginning when ice sheets finally retreated around 10,000 BC, allowing scattered tribes to establish their first lasting settlements. The tale concludes dramatically in 539 BC, when Persian Emperor Cyrus conquered mighty Babylon, forever changing the course of history. During these transformative millennia, rulers constructed vast empires using nothing but sun-dried bricks and primitive bronze tools. Scholar priests developed an ingenious system of wedge-shaped marks, pressing their thoughts into soft clay that would survive longer than gold or marble. Master builders erected colossal stepped towers called ziggurats, believing these structures could bridge the gap between earthly realms and divine kingdoms above. The genius of these ancient innovators lay in their material choice. While other cultures built with stone that crumbled or wood that rotted, Mesopotamian scribes chose humble clay tablets. Their everyday records, business transactions, and sacred texts have endured 5,000 years, outlasting the grandest palaces and mightiest fortresses. As the final ice age loosened its frozen stranglehold around the 10th millennium BC, Southwest Asia experienced a climate revolution. Temperatures rose steadily, transforming the harsh landscape that had trapped human potential for countless generations. Liberation was finally at hand. Small nomadic groups roaming the hills and valleys near the Twin Rivers discovered something that would reshape humanity forever. Wild grains, wheat, and barley were flourishing everywhere they looked. These golden fields offered abundance beyond anything their ancestors had imagined. For thousands of generations, these hardy people had lived as perpetual wanderers. They tracked migrating animal herds across vast distances, gathered seasonal fruits and nuts, and carried every possession on their weary backs. Their entire existence revolved around following nature's unpredictable rhythms, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. But suddenly, everything changed. In valleys where food grew naturally in staggering quantities, these nomads made a revolutionary decision. They stopped moving. They built shelters. They chose to stay. The earliest permanent dwellings were surprisingly simple, circular huts constructed from river reeds and thick mud. Archaeological excavations at Tel Muribet and Abu Hurira in northern Syria reveal the first evidence of this momentous transition. People were finally putting down roots. These pioneering settlers hadn't abandoned their traditional lifestyle completely. They continued hunting swift gazelles and collecting wild pistachios from scattered groves, but for the first time in human history, they were doing so from fixed locations, returning to the same hearths season after season. In the Jordan Valley, one particular settlement achieved something unprecedented. Jericho, arguably Earth's oldest continuously inhabited community, emerged around 11,000 years ago. Its residents accomplished far more than just building homes. They erected protective stone barriers, creating the first evidence of organized communal defense strategies. They also constructed enigmatic tower structures whose true purpose continues puzzling modern archaeologists. Meanwhile, far to the east, at Totoyuk in Anatolia, another fascinating community was developing along completely different lines. Here, innovative builders created an urban landscape unlike anything seen before or since. Houses were constructed so tightly together that conventional streets became impossible. Instead, residents accessed their homes through rooftop openings, traversing their settlement by walking across interconnected housetops like human highways in the sky. Yet, the most significant transformation was occurring quietly in surrounding agricultural fields. Through patient observation and careful selection techniques, early farmers were fundamentally altering wild plant species. They deliberately chose seeds from plants displaying desirable traits, larger grains, stronger stalks, husks that remained intact during harvest. Generation by generation, worthless wild grasses evolved into dependable cultivated wheat. This agricultural mastery extended beyond plant cultivation. Previously hunted animals were gradually domesticated through similar selective breeding processes. Fierce uruks, massive ancestors of modern cattle, slowly became manageable livestock. Sheep, goats, and swine followed suit, providing steady sources of meat, milk, leather, and wool, without the constant uncertainties of hunting expeditions. The agricultural revolution didn't explode overnight across the region. Instead, it spread methodically along the Fertile Crescent with a remarkable arc of productive land stretching from the Persian Gulf up through river valleys and around to Mediterranean coastal areas. This transformation unfolded gradually across multiple centuries, but its implications were absolutely staggering. For the first time in human existence, communities could generate food surpluses exceeding immediate consumption needs. This excess production liberated certain individuals from constant food-gathering responsibilities, allowing them to specialize in other essential crafts. Professional potters emerged, along with skilled weavers and expert toolmakers who could exchange their specialized creations for agricultural products. During the 6th millennium BC, another crucial innovation appeared that would revolutionize daily life: advanced pottery techniques. While humans had previously crafted basic containers from stone, wood, and woven materials for thousands of years, the controlled firing of clay produced vessels offering unprecedented advantages. These ceramic containers were simultaneously lightweight and completely waterproof, enabling long-term food storage and efficient liquid transportation. As agricultural productivity continued improving, thriving farming communities encountered fresh challenges in the flat plains between the great rivers. Natural rainfall remained inadequate for consistent crop production, but annual flooding cycles deposited nutrient-rich silt across vast areas, creating perfect growing conditions. Through ingenious engineering, people learned to excavate channels directing floodwater precisely where crops needed irrigation most. This marked the birth of systematic irrigation agriculture, setting the stage for the rise of true urban centers that would dominate the ancient world for millennia to come. When the 4th millennium BC arrived, humanity had assembled all the essential building blocks for something extraordinary. Massive settlements housing tens of thousands of residents, master craftsmen perfecting specialized trades, towering architectural marvels reaching toward the heavens, intricate religious hierarchies governing spiritual life, clearly defined social classes, extensive trading networks spanning continents, and sophisticated record-keeping systems. Everything was perfectly positioned for the next incredible chapter: the emergence of Sumerian culture and Earth's first authentic urban civilization. The southern alluvial plains, where the mighty twin rivers converged toward the sea, transformed into the beating heart of humanity's inaugural true civilization. Within these marshy deltas and abundantly fertile farmlands, an exceptional culture achieved something never before witnessed in human experience: an interconnected network of authentic metropolitan centers, each sheltering thousands of inhabitants behind protective walls crafted from sun-dried bricks. Uruk emerged as perhaps the most spectacular of these pioneering urban marvels, experiencing explosive growth after 3500 BC. Modern archaeological investigations have uncovered evidence of a settlement eventually spanning nearly 250 hectares, potentially housing up to 50,000 residents during its golden age. Enormous defensive barriers surrounded densely populated neighborhoods, filled with private residences, bustling workshops, vibrant marketplaces, and imposing government buildings. Rising majestically from Uruk's center stood its greatest architectural triumph, or the magnificent White Temple. Positioned atop a colossal elevated platform, This holy sanctuary soared like an artificial mountain above the surrounding flatlands. Its brilliant whitewashed exterior blazed under the relentless desert sun, creating a beacon visible across countless miles of landscape. This elevated platform represented an early version of what would eventually evolve into the iconic ziggurat design, showcasing both remarkable engineering capabilities and profound religious dedication. Additional urban powerhouses sprouted throughout the region, like seeds taking root in fertile soil. Erd established itself near the ancient shoreline, though millennia of accumulated river sediment now places it far from modern coastlines, developing into a thriving commercial port. Eridu, revered by local traditions as the most ancient settlement, housed an elaborate temple complex honoring Enki, the revered deity governing wisdom and life-giving freshwater. Lagash, Kish, Nippur, and Umma expanded into formidable city-states, each maintaining distinctive cultural identities, ruling bloodlines, and protective patron divinities. These metropolitan centers represented far more than merely enlarged villages. They embodied a completely revolutionary approach to human social organization. Unlike previous settlements populated primarily by farmers, these cities housed incredibly diverse specialists. Metalworkers forging bronze tools, potters shaping ceramic vessels, weavers creating elaborate textiles, merchants facilitating long-distance trade, administrators managing complex bureaucracies, professional soldiers defending territorial boundaries, and priests conducting sacred rituals. Each metropolitan center's architectural layout clearly revealed its sophisticated social hierarchy. Imposing temple complexes dominated the skyline, surrounded by administrative headquarters, luxurious mansions housing privileged elites, and modest residential districts accommodating common citizens. The development of monumental construction projects completely transformed the regional landscape. Sacred buildings evolved from basic shrines into elaborate multi-chamber complexes positioned atop massive elevated foundations. These primitive ziggurats, while not yet achieving the classic stepped pyramid configuration of later eras, nonetheless commanded the horizon with impressive authority. By 3000 BC, Ur's temple platform towered over 11 meters high, requiring more than 720,000 individually fired bricks for completion, an engineering feat demonstrating incredible organizational capabilities. The crucial question of who coordinated these ambitious construction endeavors reveals another groundbreaking innovation: formalized leadership structures. Initial governance systems apparently operated through shared authority mechanisms. Councils composed of respected elders and citizen assemblies wielded considerable political influence. However, religious authorities controlling valuable temple resources gradually accumulated greater power, eventually becoming priest-kings known locally as Ensi. These pioneering rulers derived their legitimacy from claiming special connections with divine forces. They functioned as crucial intermediaries bridging supernatural and mortal worlds during periods of crisis warfare, devastating floods, or prolonged droughts. Temporary military commanders might receive emergency appointments. These Lugal, literally translating as big man, occasionally transformed their temporary emergency powers into permanent royal authority, gradually displacing priestly leadership. By 2900 BC, monarchy had become firmly entrenched throughout most regional cities. Kings claimed divine approval for their rule, though they hadn't yet proclaimed actual divine status for themselves. Royal burial chambers from this era at a base, extraordinary wealth, minus gleaming golden vessels, intricate jewelry masterpieces, sophisticated musical instruments, and skeletal remains of servants, apparently sacrificed to accompany their sovereign into the afterlife realm. Religious convictions thoroughly permeated every aspect of daily existence within these early city-states. The divine pantheon included numerous deities, with each metropolitan center elevating its protective god or goddess to special prominence. Anu commanded the sky realm, Enlil governed wind and storms, Enki controlled water and wisdom, while Inanna presided over love and warfare, ranking among the most influential supernatural powers. Citizens believed these gods resembled humans in their emotional responses and basic needs, though they possessed vastly superior abilities. Temple complexes served as earthly residences for deities, where priests conducted elaborate ceremonial rituals designed to satisfy these divine inhabitants. Daily presentations of food, beverages, and aromatic incense sustained the gods, who might otherwise unleash catastrophic floods, devastating famines, or enemy invasions upon negligent worshippers. Their cosmic worldview envisioned reality as a flat circular disk, with Earth positioned at its center, covered by a heavenly dome above. Below this earthly plane lay the underworld Meodon, a gloomy domain where deceased spirits endured a shadowy half-existence. Unlike later civilizations promising heavenly rewards for virtuous behavior, this culture offered no paradise for the righteous. The afterlife awaited everyone regardless of earthly moral conduct, consisting merely of a diminished version of mortal existence. Their comprehension of natural phenomena blended practical observation with mythological interpretation. Medical documents from this period demonstrate sophisticated anatomical knowledge and treatment methods, yet attribute illness to divine anger or demonic interference. Similarly, advanced astronomical studies tracked celestial movements for agricultural and religious calendar purposes, while interpreting unusual cosmic events as supernatural omens requiring careful interpretation. Cuneiform writing, one of this culture's most transformative innovations, continued evolving throughout this historical period. What originated as simple pictographic symbols for basic accounting gradually developed into a comprehensive communication system capable of expressing abstract philosophical concepts and preserving spoken language permanently. By 2500 BC, professional scribes were utilizing approximately 600 distinct symbols to create not merely inventory lists, but personal correspondence, legal contracts, medical treatises, and literary masterpieces. Literacy remained exclusively available to specialized scribal classes. Wealthy families' young sons began intensive training in tablet schools around age 7, dedicating years to mastering this complex symbolic system. These educated scribes achieved considerable social status, serving as administrators, accountants, and record keepers for religious temples, royal palaces, and merchant enterprises. The original language of this pioneering civilization remains partially enigmatic. Unrelated to Semitic or Indo-European linguistic families, it exists as an isolated language with no known relatives. Its unique grammatical structure and phonetic system survived in cuneiform form when subsequent peoples adapted the writing system for their own languages, preserving this ancient tongue for modern scholars to decipher and study. The principle of proportional punishment, that later became famous as equal retribution for equal harm in subsequent Semitic legal systems, first emerged during this transformative period. However, what truly defined these ancient metropolitan centers was their sophisticated economic machinery, which operated through massive temple complexes and royal palaces controlling enormous agricultural domains. These religious and governmental institutions functioned as economic powerhouses, employing thousands upon thousands of workers dedicated to cultivating extensive farmlands, managing vast livestock herds, and producing elaborate textiles. Temple administrators developed remarkably advanced bookkeeping methodologies, meticulously documenting revenues, expenditures, loan agreements, and interest calculations with unprecedented precision. Meanwhile, private commercial enterprises thrived alongside institutional operations. Wealthy merchant dynasties organized ambitious trading expeditions, reaching distant territories, exchanging locally produced grain, high-quality textiles, and expertly crafted manufactured items for precious timber, essential metals, and coveted luxury goods. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, these extensive commercial networks stretched all the way to the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan, extended into Iran and Afghanistan's mountainous highlands, reached northward into Anatolia, and flowed southward through Persian Gulf trading routes. Technological breakthroughs accelerated rapidly throughout this dynamic era. The revolutionary potter's wheel, appearing around 3500 BC, completely transformed ceramic manufacturing processes. Wheel transportation vehicles, first documented around 3200 BC, revolutionized how people and goods moved across vast distances. Bronze metallurgy achieved significant advances, producing increasingly durable tools and superior weapons. Mathematical understanding grew remarkably sophisticated. establishing a sexagesimal numerical system built upon units of 60 meth, whose enduring influence continues today through our 60-minute hours and 360-degree geometric circles. Despite the urban revolution fundamentally reshaping societal structures, the majority of people remained agricultural workers, either residing in countryside villages or dwelling within protective shadows cast by towering city walls. Their farming methodologies became increasingly refined and specialized. They developed innovative plow designs, constructed sophisticated irrigation networks featuring regulatory gates and protective levees, and pioneered techniques for combating the growing soil salinization problems caused by excessive irrigation practices. Social stratification grew increasingly intricate as metropolitan centers expanded their influence and population. Royal families, high-ranking priests, and hereditary nobles occupied society's apex. Beneath this elite tier ranked various professionals, educated scribes, successful merchants, and master craftsmen possessing specialized skills. The majority of urban residents consisted of ordinary craft workers, manual laborers, and domestic servants, performing essential daily tasks. At society's base stood enslaved individuals, though slavery remained less widespread than in many subsequent civilizations, often representing temporary conditions resulting from unpaid debts or wartime captivity, rather than permanent hereditary status. Women within this cultural framework possessed considerably more legal rights compared to numerous later civilizations. They could legally own property, independently operate commercial businesses, and even serve as professional scribes or religious priestesses, although the highest spiritual and political positions remained exclusively male territories. Marriage arrangements were typically negotiated between families, usually involving bride prices paid directly to the woman's parents. Divorce remained legally possible for both spouses under specific circumstances, though men generally enjoyed greater freedom in initiating such proceedings. The regional city-states existed in virtually perpetual competition and conflict with one another. Disputes concerning water usage rights, territorial boundary demarcations, and commercial route control frequently escalated into full-scale military confrontations. Around 2500 BC, Uma's ruler Lugal-Zagezi successfully conquered several neighboring urban centers and temporarily unified substantial portions of the southern plains. However, his remarkable achievement proved ephemeral, ultimately setting the stage for external conquest by more ambitious forces. By 2334 BC, Mesopotamia's political landscape stood perfectly positioned for dramatic transformation. The independent city-states had successfully developed sophisticated cultural traditions, advanced technological capabilities, and complex social organizational systems. Yet their persistent internal rivalries created dangerous vulnerabilities that ambitious outsiders could exploit. Northward, in territories surrounding modern Baghdad, a leader possessing unprecedented imperial ambitions was steadily ascending to supreme power, Sargon of Akkad, destined to establish Earth's first authentic multi-territorial empire. The remarkable legacy of Sumerian civilization would persist and flourish within the imperial frameworks that subsequently emerged, as later peoples systematically adopted and adapted its profound religious concepts, compelling literary themes, distinctive artistic conventions, and groundbreaking scientific knowledge. Even after losing complete political independence, Sumerian cultural influence continued shaping Mesopotamian civilization for countless millennia. North of the ancient Sumerian city-states, another distinct culture had been steadily developing throughout the central Mesopotamian plains. These northern peoples spoke a Semitic language fundamentally different from the isolated linguistic system used by their southern neighbors. While significantly influenced by the extraordinary achievements of the older civilization, they maintained their own unique cultural identity centered around their principal settlement. Modern archaeologists have yet to pinpoint Akkad's exact geographical location, though most evidence suggests it stood somewhere near present-day Baghdad. From this mysterious city emerged a figure whose boundless imperial ambitions would completely transform the ancient world's political landscape. Sargon, whose name translates as the legitimate king in his native tongue. Sargon's origins remain wrapped in legendary mystery and contradictory accounts. According to his personal inscriptions, he claimed humble beginnings as the son of a simple gardener or date palm cultivator. Later traditional narratives portrayed him as an abandoned foundling set adrift in a reed basket upon Euphrates river waters, remarkably similar to how biblical Moses would later be described. Regardless of his actual background, Sargon began his political career serving as cupbearer to Kish's king, an influential northern city-state. From this relatively modest court position, Sargon demonstrated extraordinary political acumen and exceptional military leadership abilities. Around 2334 BC, he successfully seized control of Kish through circumstances now completely lost to historical records. Having established this crucial initial power base, he turned his strategic attention southward toward the prosperous cities dotting the fertile southern plains. Lugalza-Gisi, Uma's ambitious ruler who had briefly unified numerous southern cities under his direct control, became Sargon's primary adversary. The epic confrontation represented far more than a simple power struggle between competing ambitious leaders. This represented a fundamental clash between two completely different governmental organizational models. Lugalza-Gisi sought preserving the traditional city-state system, with himself functioning as supreme paramount ruler, while Sargon envisioned something absolutely revolutionary, a unified territorial state operating under direct centralized control. Through a series of brilliantly executed military campaigns, Sargon decisively defeated Lugalza-Gisi and the combined allied forces representing southern cities. One surviving inscription boldly claims he ceremonially washed his weapons in the sea, suggesting his victorious armies successfully reached the Persian Gulf coastline. The triumphant northern conqueror then implemented radically new governmental approaches previously unknown in human history. Rather than permitting conquered cities to maintain traditional autonomy under local ruling dynasties who merely paid tribute, Sargon systematically removed existing rulers and installed completely loyal officials, often his own family members, as direct governors. This administrative innovation marked the birth of humanity's first authentic empire, a multi-ethnic state featuring centralized authority extending across vast territorial expanses. At its greatest territorial extent, this revolutionary empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to Mediterranean Sea coastlines, encompassing not only all of Mesopotamia, but substantial portions of modern Syria, Turkey, and Iran. To effectively bind this incredibly diverse realm together, Sargon implemented several brilliant unifying strategies that would influence imperial administration for centuries. Rimush and Manishtuzu, Sargon's direct heirs, dedicated most of their ruling years combating persistent uprisings throughout their inherited territories. Both perished through violent means, likely victims of assassination plots after governing for relatively brief periods. However, Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, emerged as the dynasty's most formidable leader following its legendary founder. Ascending to supreme power around 2254 BC, he significantly enhanced imperial administrative systems while launching extraordinarily ambitious military expeditions across multiple fronts. When confronted by a massive coordinated rebellion involving several major metropolitan centers, he displayed exceptional strategic brilliance, combined with merciless determination, systematically crushing all opposition forces and successfully reconstructing his grandfather's territorial empire. Following these decisive victories, Naram-Sin implemented an absolutely unprecedented transformation in Mesopotamian political traditions. He proclaimed himself a living deity, something no previous ruler had ever dared attempt. Earlier monarchs had claimed divine appointment or asserted they governed as representatives of supernatural forces, but Naram-Sin revolutionized royal ideology entirely. His name appeared in official documents, accompanied by the divine determinative Manyud, the specific cuneiform symbol exclusively reserved for actual deities. State-sponsored artistic representations depicted him wearing the sacred horned crown, traditionally belonging only to gods themselves. The radical elevation of mortal rulers to divine status reflected both the extraordinary power concentrated within imperial offices and perhaps represented a calculated strategy for strengthening loyalty throughout a multi-ethnic realm where diverse local religious traditions created potential conflicts. Naram Sin's reign marked the absolute pinnacle of imperial authority and territorial control. His renowned victory stele, discovered at Susa in modern Iran, portrays him as a heroic figure, physically towering above his soldiers while triumphantly trampling defeated adversaries beneath his feet. The innovative artistic conventions established during this period, showing rulers as superhuman in both scale and accomplishments, would profoundly influence royal iconographic traditions throughout the ancient Near East for countless centuries. Despite these impressive governmental achievements, serious structural weaknesses were gradually undermining the imperial foundation. Maintaining effective control over such enormous territories using primitive ancient transportation and communication technologies proved increasingly impossible. Provincial governors, frequently appointed from royal family members, steadily developed independent power bases that challenged central authority. The crushing financial costs of continuous military campaigns aimed at suppressing rebellions severely strained economic resources. External pressures simultaneously intensified during this critical period. Historical inscriptions from Naram Sin's era document ongoing conflicts with mountain tribal groups called the Guti, who conducted devastating raids from their Zagros mountain strongholds eastward into imperial territories. From northwestern directions, the emerging power of Ebla in Syria presented another significant challenge to maintaining imperial control over distant provinces. After Naram Sin's death around 2218 BC, his son Shah Kali Shari inherited these escalating problems threatening imperial stability. While demonstrating capable leadership skills that temporarily preserved imperial power, the centrifugal forces systematically pulling the empire apart ultimately proved overwhelming. Provincial regions broke away from central control, external enemies pressed inward from multiple directions, and economic difficulties deepened throughout the realm. A surviving text dramatically captures these chaotic times with haunting questions. Who was king? Who was not king? Suggesting extended periods of disputed succession claims and completely fragmented governmental authority. This era of confusion and political instability continued until approximately 2154 BC, when the dynasty's final nominal ruler was definitively overthrown, bringing the world's first empire to its ultimate conclusion. Traditional Mesopotamian historical interpretation attributed this catastrophic collapse to divine punishment for Naram Sin's unprecedented pride in claiming godhood and his sacrilegious destruction of Nepa's holy city. Modern historians identify more concrete contributing factors: ecological strain resulting from intensive agricultural practices, insurmountable administrative challenges of controlling vast territories, severe economic difficulties, and relentless pressure from surrounding peoples seeking territorial expansion. Following the empire's disintegration, various successor states emerged across the fragmented region. Southern cities reasserted complete independence under local ruling dynasties, while northern territories fell under Guti-controlled mountain peoples from the Zagros range, who established dominance over significant portions of the former imperial heartland. The profound cultural impact of humanity's first empire far outlasted its temporary political structures. The dynamic fusion of northern and southern cultural traditions created a sophisticated blended Mesopotamian civilization that would influence regional development for centuries. The imperial concept itself, unified territorial states under single supreme rulers, became a recurring aspiration, driving ambitious leaders throughout subsequent historical periods. Sargon's dynasty maintained such powerful prestige that later rulers, including Assyrian kings nearly 2,000 years afterward, would claim ancestral connections to this pioneering empire to legitimize their own governmental authority. Even during its decline phase, this groundbreaking imperial state's achievements left permanent marks on historical development. The organizational innovations, extensive cultural exchanges, and revolutionary political concepts developed during this transformative period provided essential models for future empires extending far beyond Mesopotamia into the broader ancient world. Though the empire proved relatively short-lived, lasting fewer than 2 centuries, its enduring legacy would influence imperial state formation for millennia, as the fundamental template for territorial conquest and administration. Following the world's first empire's dramatic collapse, extensive fragmentation spread across the lands between the rivers. Mountain-dwelling Guti seized control of northern territories while southern city-states regained complete independence under local leadership. This period of political disunity persisted for nearly a full century. The Guti, described in contemporary texts as dragons of the mountains, and people who recognized no restraints, maintained loose control over northern regions, but never established sophisticated administrative structures. Their rule, characterized primarily by raiding expeditions and tribute collection rather than actual governance, grew increasingly unpopular among settled populations living under their dominion. Meanwhile, throughout southern territories, a remarkable cultural renaissance began emerging. Liberated from northern control, yet drawing upon integrated traditions developed during the previous imperial era, ancient cities experienced extraordinary creative rebirth. Scholars designate this phase the Neo-Sumerian period, marking the revitalization of older cultural forms within innovative political structures. Among these resurgent southern centers, Lagash achieved exceptional prominence under a ruler named Gudea. While never attempting to construct large territorial states, Gudea presided over an unprecedented flourishing of artistic expression, architectural innovation, and religious devotion. Dozens of statues depicting this devout leader have survived, showing him in reverent poses with hands clasped in prayer. Crafted from precious diorite stone imported from distant lands, these sculptures demonstrate both remarkable artistic sophistication and extensive international trade connections. Inscriptions left by Gudea describe elaborate temple construction projects and profound religious dedication. One remarkable text recounts a divine dream where the god Ningirsu provided detailed architectural specifications for temple reconstruction. While Lagash flourished culturally, a different city would soon emerge as the political center of a renewed territorial state. Urlian, an ancient settlement near the Persian Gulf, became the seat of a new dynasty, founded by ruler Ur-Nammu around 2112 BC. This capable leader successfully expelled the Guti from northern territories and reunited much of the former imperial territory, though on a somewhat reduced scale. Unlike previous empire builders who emphasized military conquest and forced centralization, Ur-Nammu established his historical reputation primarily as a lawgiver and master builder, setting the stage for a new chapter in Mesopotamian political development. The revolutionary legal code bearing Ur-Nammu's name, though only fragments survive today, represents humanity's earliest known systematic legal collection, predating Hammurabi's celebrated laws by over 3 centuries. This groundbreaking legal document established fixed monetary penalties for numerous criminal offenses, fundamentally shifting away from brutal physical punishment towards standardized financial compensation systems. The code demonstrated remarkable social consciousness by protecting society's most vulnerable members, widows, orphans, and impoverished citizens, from exploitation by wealthy elites. Most remarkably, this ancient legal text included humanity's first recorded traffic regulations, establishing clear right-of-way rules for boats navigating crowded canal systems throughout the kingdom. Beyond these legal innovations, Ur-Nammu launched an extraordinarily ambitious construction campaign throughout his territorial domains. His most spectacular achievement involved constructing colossal ziggurats, massive stepped temple complexes, rising majestically toward the heavens like artificial mountains. The finest surviving example at Ur featured 3 magnificent levels, reaching approximately 30 meters high, accessible through elaborate triple staircases. These imposing architectural marvels, visible across countless miles of surrounding flat landscape, served as powerful symbols representing renewed cultural confidence and profound religious devotion among the population. The sophisticated administrative framework developed during this transformative period represented a masterful blend of centralized authority with respectful local autonomy. Provincial governors supervised regional governmental affairs, while intricate bureaucratic networks managed systematic collection and redistribution of essential resources. Royal officials conducted regular inspection tours throughout distant territories, while professional messengers carried vital communications along designated routes connecting administrative headquarters. Under Ur-Nammu's son Shulgi, who governed for an unprecedented 48 years, the unified state achieved its absolute peak of organizational efficiency and widespread prosperity. This exceptionally long-reigning monarch implemented numerous governmental innovations that significantly strengthened central authority while carefully respecting cherished local customs and traditions. Shulgi established a standardized calendar system, completely reformed weights and measurement standards, created an extensive royal messenger network featuring posting stations, thoroughly reorganized taxation systems, and standardized scribal educational curricula throughout the realm. He also masterfully cultivated his public image as an ideal ruler through various symbolic demonstrations of superhuman capability. Shulgi claimed to be an extraordinary champion runner who personally delivered ritual offerings between major temple cities within single days, covering distances exceeding 100 miles. Whether literally true or purely symbolic, this remarkable claim emphasized his crucial role in unifying distant centers through personal physical exertion and divine favor. During his reign's later years, Shulgi followed precedents established by earlier rulers and declared himself a living deity. Temples dedicated exclusively to his divine cult were constructed throughout the realm, and his name appeared in official documents accompanied by sacred divine determinatives. This deification of living monarchs represented calculated attempts to create solid religious foundations supporting political unity across traditionally independent municipal centers. The sophisticated economic system operating during this period skillfully combined centralized governmental planning with dynamic market-driven elements. The state directly controlled vast agricultural estates, employed thousands of workers through government agencies, and managed extensive redistribution networks, ensuring equitable resource allocation. Massive textile workshops housed hundreds of female workers producing high-quality goods for both domestic consumption and profitable international export markets. Simultaneously, private merchants conducted independent trading ventures across great distances, though typically operating under careful royal oversight and regulation. Cultural achievements during this Renaissance era included a dramatic revival of ancient Sumerian language for religious ceremonies and literary composition purposes. Scribal educational institutions flourished magnificently, preserving and significantly expanding traditional textual collections. Many literary works later recognized as timeless classics were carefully compiled and standardized during this remarkable period of cultural rebirth. These preserved texts included elaborate creation mythologies, sacred temple hymns, royal praise compositions, and practical wisdom literature addressing daily moral and ethical concerns. One particularly innovative literary form emerging during this era consisted of royal love songs, lyrical compositions, depicting romantic relationships between earthly kings and the divine goddess Inanna. These poems ingeniously mixed political themes with erotic imagery, serving to reinforce theological foundations supporting royal authority through powerful divine marriage metaphors. A surviving hymn describing Shulgi portrays him as Inanna's beloved husband, symbolically linking political stability with cosmic order and divine approval. International diplomatic relations during this prosperous period encompassed both careful diplomatic negotiations and strategic military campaigns. Royal marriages cemented crucial alliances with neighboring powers, while extensive trade networks reached distant lands, importing luxury goods from territories as remote as the Indus Valley Civilization and mountainous Afghanistan. Strategic military expeditions secured frontier boundaries and vital trade routes, particularly defending against nomadic tribal groups from eastern highlands and western deserts who periodically threatened settled agricultural communities with devastating raids and territorial encroachment. The remarkable stability characterizing this cultural renaissance gradually began deteriorating under Shulgi's less capable successors. Ibn Sin, the dynasty's final ruler, confronted mounting challenges emerging from multiple threatening directions simultaneously. Provincial governors increasingly operated as completely independent rulers, systematically withholding tax revenues and eventually declaring outright independence from central authority. Amorite nomadic groups successfully infiltrated from western desert regions, establishing permanent settlements in previously urban-dominated territories and fundamentally altering demographic balances. Most catastrophically, the ancient irrigation networks sustaining agricultural productivity throughout the heartland faced devastating combinations of severe drought conditions and cumulative salinization effects. This salinization process, where repeated irrigation practices in arid climates caused destructive salt accumulation in agricultural soil, gradually reduced fertility across vast farming regions. Contemporary grain price records, documented in surviving texts, demonstrate dramatic inflationary trends, clearly indicating severe agricultural difficulties threatening societal stability. Correspondence surviving between Ibbi Sin and provincial governor Ishbiera vividly illustrates the rapidly deteriorating political situation. The governor reported complete inability to deliver crucial grain shipments due to persistent threats from hostile enemies, including both external nomadic groups and internal rebellious elements challenging governmental authority. Eventually, Ishbiera established himself as completely independent ruler in Isin, effectively seceding from the unified state and inspiring similar rebellions throughout distant provinces. The final devastating blow originated from external enemies beyond Mesopotamian boundaries. The neighboring kingdom of Elam, centered in modern southwestern Iran, had steadily grown increasingly powerful throughout preceding decades. Around 2004 BC, Elamite military forces, allied with other enemies of the regime, successfully captured Ur-Self through coordinated siege warfare. The magnificent city suffered complete pillaging, its sacred ziggurat endured deliberate desecration, and Ebel-Sin was captured alive and transported to Elam as a prisoner, where he presumably died in humiliating exile far from his ancestral homeland. A contemporary lament composed during this traumatic period describes Ur's catastrophic fall in heartbreaking terms. The city has been completely defiled. Its people wander like lost ghosts. The royal treasuries have been thoroughly pillaged. Corpses float ominously in the Euphrates River, which once brought life and prosperity. This remarkable literary work brilliantly combined historical documentation with theological interpretation, viewing the destruction as divine punishment for accumulated human moral failings and religious negligence. Though politically devastating, Ur's dramatic collapse failed to erase the extraordinary cultural achievements accomplished during this creative Renaissance period. The revolutionary legal concepts, magnificent literary works, sophisticated administrative techniques, and innovative architectural forms developed during this era continued influencing Mesopotamian civilization for countless centuries. As one historical chapter concluded dramatically, the stage was perfectly set for entirely new political configurations, emerging throughout the fertile lands between the rivers, setting the foundation for the next great empire that would reshape the ancient world. Hammurabi personally handled grievances, arriving from remote territories, thoroughly investigated accusations of administrative corruption among regional officials, and meticulously supervised religious rituals alongside massive construction undertakings. This remarkable combination of grand strategic vision with microscopic attention to administrative minutiae perfectly characterized his distinctive leadership approach. Regarding religious affairs, Hammurabi systematically elevated Babylon's guardian deity, Marduk, from purely local significance to supreme prominence within the broader regional divine hierarchy, while simultaneously maintaining respectful honor toward traditional supernatural powers, including Enlil, Shamash, and Ishtar. Royal propaganda increasingly portrayed Marduk as absolute sovereign of all deities, directly mirroring Babylon's unprecedented political dominance throughout Mesopotamia. The monarch also carefully positioned himself as divinely selected for leadership, though deliberately avoiding the complete self-deification attempts undertaken by certain earlier rulers. His famous law code's introduction describes him as chosen by Anu and Enlil to advance citizen welfare and establish justice throughout the land. This delicate balance between claiming divine sanction while emphasizing human service became the cornerstone of Babylonian royal ideology for generations. When Hammurabi died around 1750 BC, he bequeathed a magnificently unified kingdom, encompassing most of Mesopotamia. His son Samsu-Iluna inherited what appeared to be an exceptionally stable governmental system. However, this surface stability proved dangerously misleading. Within mere years, violent uprisings erupted throughout southern cities, possessing ancient cultural traditions and fierce independence. Though initially crushed through military force, these rebellions continuously reignited, systematically eroding central governmental authority. Compounding these internal difficulties, an entirely new external menace emerged from the marshy badlands of the extreme southern regions. A mysterious group known as the Sealand dynasty established firm control over coastal territories, eventually capturing several important southern municipalities from weakening Babylonian authority. Simultaneously, mountain tribal warriors from the Zagros Range launched persistent incursions along vulnerable eastern frontier boundaries. Under these relentless mounting pressures, Babylon's territorial dominion gradually contracted like a slowly deflating balloon. By 1700 BC, nearly 50 years following Hammurabi's death, much of the prosperous southern territories had been permanently lost. Subsequent monarchs maintained control over central Mesopotamian regions, but never successfully regained their great predecessors' extensive imperial holdings. Despite significant territorial reduction, Babylon itself remained remarkably prosperous and maintained overwhelming cultural dominance throughout the region. The magnificent city expanded to cover nearly 450 hectares, housing perhaps 60,000 to 80,000 inhabitants within its protective walls. Its elaborate temples, imposing palaces, and bustling commercial districts transformed it into one of the ancient world's most spectacular urban centers. Babylonian culture during this flourishing period masterfully synthesized ancient traditions while simultaneously developing distinctive, innovative forms of expression. Dedicated scholars systematically compiled and preserved ancient textual collections, including magnificent literary masterpieces, comprehensive medical treatises, sophisticated mathematical works, and profound religious compositions. The Akkadian language of Babylon evolved into the international diplomatic tongue throughout the Near East, utilized for official communication between kingdoms across vast geographical regions. Intellectual achievements flourished spectacularly, particularly within astronomy, mathematics, and medical sciences. Babylonian astronomers meticulously tracked celestial movements with unprecedented precision, developing humanity's first predictive mathematical models, accurately describing planetary behavioral patterns. Mathematicians operated with remarkably advanced numeral systems, enabling complex calculations, including sophisticated operations with fractions, solutions to quadratic equations, and early approximations of irrational numbers, like the square root of 2. This extraordinary creative period continued for nearly 2 centuries following Hammurabi's death. Despite gradual reduction in Babylon's direct territorial control, the dynasty successfully maintained political stability throughout core regions, while cultural influence extended far beyond official political boundaries. The conclusion arrived suddenly and catastrophically. Around 1595 BC, a completely unexpected threat materialized from far northern territories. The Hittites, Furies, and Indo-European-speaking people, established in central Anatolia, modern Turkey, had been constructing their own powerful kingdom far removed from Mesopotamian political centers. Under an exceptionally ambitious ruler named Mur-Silite, Hittite military forces marched over 500 miles from their mountainous homeland in a raid of absolutely unprecedented scale and audacity. The Babylonians, traditionally focused on familiar threats from eastern and southern directions, remained utterly unprepared for this shocking northern assault. The Hittites successfully breached Babylon's formidable defensive systems, systematically plundered its accumulated treasures, and definitively overthrew the ruling dynasty that had governed for 3 centuries of relative prosperity. Following this devastating raid, the Hittites withdrew completely to their distant Anatolian homeland, apparently satisfied with accumulated wealth rather than seeking permanent territorial occupation. Into the massive power vacuum created by this shocking attack stepped another group that had been steadily increasing their regional influence throughout northern Mesopotamia, the Kassites. Originally from the rugged Zagros Mountains, these hardy people had been serving as professional mercenaries and establishing permanent settlements throughout Babylonian territories for multiple generations. Following the destructive Hittite raid, a Kassite leader successfully seized the Babylonian throne, establishing a revolutionary new dynasty destined to rule for an extraordinary 400 years. Though politically transformative, the Hittite attack and subsequent Kassite takeover failed to disrupt essential cultural continuity. The newcomers enthusiastically adopted established Babylonian religious practices, linguistic traditions, and governmental customs. They carefully preserved and continued sophisticated administrative practices, cherished literary traditions, and distinctive architectural styles. Many later Mesopotamians nostalgically looked back upon Hammurabi's era as a golden age, a remarkable time when justice prevailed throughout the land, and the entire region stood magnificently united under enlightened rule from the city destined to remain its cultural heart for millennia. After the dramatic Hittite raid definitively toppled Hammurabi's dynasty, the Kassites, as originally mountain inhabitants from the eastern Zagros range, had been gradually integrating into Mesopotamian society for generations, serving as trusted mercenaries, establishing rural settlements, and adopting local customs. Seizing the unprecedented opportunity created by the power vacuum, Kassite leader Agamtais claimed the prestigious throne, establishing what would become the longest ruling dynasty in entire Mesopotamian history. Unlike previous conquerors who imposed dramatic revolutionary changes, these pragmatic newcomers wholeheartedly embraced the sophisticated cultural and religious traditions of territories they now governed. They adopted traditional royal titles, honored established deities, and maintained proven administrative practices. Under their remarkably stable governance, the region experienced unprecedented stability, with the Kassite dynasty maintaining effective control for nearly 4 centuries, from approximately 1595 to 1155 BC. Contemporary records from early Kassite rule remain frustratingly sparse, limiting our understanding of this transition period. By the mid-15th century BC, however, historical documentation becomes significantly more abundant, revealing a kingdom that, while geographically smaller than Hammurabi's empire, successfully maintained control over the essential Babylonian heartland and conducted sophisticated diplomatic relations with neighboring powers. The political landscape throughout the Near East had transformed dramatically during this period. No single power dominated the entire region. Instead, several major kingdoms coexisted within what historians term the Club of Great Powers, a complex system of balanced rivalries and strategic alliances that maintained remarkable regional stability for centuries. Royal astrologers meticulously monitored planetary trajectories to identify supernatural omens crucial for imperial decision-making. These observations, originally pursued for divination purposes, accumulated into comprehensive databases that would eventually enable precise mathematical predictions of celestial phenomena. The zodiacal framework dividing the ecliptic into 12 segments, named after specific constellations, began achieving recognizable structure during this transformative era. Medical documentation from this period reveals sophisticated dual healing approaches, masterfully combining empirical treatments, herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and dietary recommendations with spiritual interventions addressing divine or demonic sources of illness. Diagnostic manuals systematically linked observed symptoms to accurate prognoses and appropriate therapeutic interventions, demonstrating remarkable clinical observation despite limited understanding of internal physiological mechanisms. Artistic traditions showcased exceptional technical mastery within established cultural conventions. The distinctive Kassite style featured in cylinder seals displayed precisely carved figures with extraordinarily elaborate detail work. Monumental artistic expressions continued earlier traditions while incorporating subtle innovative elements from diverse cultural influences. Glass production achieved unprecedented sophistication levels, creating colorful decorative vessels for exclusive luxury markets throughout the region. Babylon itself flourished magnificently as the administrative and cultural nucleus of the kingdom. Though geographically smaller than during its imperial zenith under Hammurabi's rule, the city remained a spectacular urban center featuring impressive temple complexes, vibrant marketplace districts, and diverse residential neighborhoods. The Kassites repeatedly renovated Marduk's Great Temple, successfully maintaining Babylon's prestigious status as the region's preeminent religious center. Throughout their remarkably long reign, Kassite rulers consistently maintained peaceful diplomatic relations with neighboring powers deliberately preferring skillful negotiation to costly military conquest. When conflicts inevitably arose, they typically involved frontier territorial disputes or defensive responses to external aggression rather than representing ambitious expansionist campaigns. This relatively peaceful governmental approach significantly contributed to the dynasty's extraordinary longevity, but eventually rendered them vulnerable to increasingly militaristic neighboring powers. Northward, a resurgent Assyria systematically expanded its territorial holdings under ambitious rulers like Adad-nirari, originally functioning as a commercial city-state focused on extensive trade networks. Assyria evolved into an aggressively territorial state commanding formidable military capabilities. By the 13th century BC, Assyrian military forces began directly challenging Kassite control throughout northern Mesopotamian territories. The carefully balanced system of great powers started unraveling around 1200 BC, when dramatic upheavals completely transformed the Near Eastern political landscape. The mighty Hittite Empire collapsed suddenly, with its capital Hattusa destroyed and permanently abandoned. Egyptian power contracted severely amid internal governmental problems and mysterious sea peoples' raids. International trade networks disintegrated catastrophically, and numerous urban centers declined or were entirely abandoned. The precise causes of this widespread regional disruption remain hotly debated among modern historians. Climate change may have triggered devastating crop failures and widespread famine. Population movements brought previously unknown groups into violent conflict with established powers. Whatever the exact combination of contributing factors, the result was extended instability that historians term the Bronze Age collapse, a systemic failure of political and economic structures that had maintained regional order for centuries. Amid this widespread turbulence, the Kassite kingdom initially demonstrated remarkable resilience, successfully outlasting several contemporary great powers. However, mounting external pressures eventually proved overwhelming. Elamite military forces from southwestern Iran conducted increasingly destructive raids deep into Babylonian territory. Elamite king Shutruk-Nahanti led a devastating military campaign around 1160 BC, successfully capturing important cities and carrying away priceless cultural treasures, including Naram Sin's victory stele and Hammurabi's famous law code. This Elamite invasion fatally weakened Kassite governmental control. A native Babylonian dynasty, originating from the ancient southern city of Asin, successfully seized power around 1155 BC, definitively ending 4 centuries of Kassite rule. The second dynasty of Asin attempted restoring Babylonian greatness through renewed construction projects and aggressive campaigns against Elam, achieving considerable success under kings like Nebuchadnezzar OC, who recovered stolen divine statues and cultural artifacts. Despite dramatic political transition, essential cultural continuity persisted throughout this period. The extended Kassite era left an enduring legacy within Babylonian civilization. Their long, relatively stable rule had enabled intellectual and cultural development even without dramatic territorial expansion. The systematic organization of knowledge, precise astronomical observations, innovative land management systems, and distinctive artistic traditions established during their reign would profoundly influence Mesopotamian civilization for centuries to come. As the Bronze Age transitioned into the Iron Age around 1000 BC, entirely new powers and peoples would fundamentally reshape Mesopotamia's geopolitical landscape once again. Yet the robust cultural foundations established during the Kassite period, building upon millennia of previous development, provided a resilient framework enabling Babylonian civilization to survive dramatic political changes and eventually experience another magnificent renaissance under future dynasties. While Babylon experienced centuries of relative stability under Kassite governance, a formidable military power was steadily developing throughout northern Mesopotamia's reaches, in territories watered by the upper Tigris River, featuring rolling hills and rainfall-dependent agriculture. The Assyrians crafted a society defined by exceptional military prowess, administrative efficiency, and ruthless determination. Originally centered around the ancient trading city of Ashur-Amay, the Seers Rig-Brev from which they derived their name, these northern people had long maintained sophisticated commercial networks connecting Anatolia, the Mediterranean, and southern Mesopotamia. Their extensive experience as international trade intermediaries provided broad awareness of distant regions and resources, knowledge that would later serve ambitious imperial goals. The transformation from trading city-state to expansionist empire began gradually during the 14th century BC. Early rulers like Ashurbanipal, circa 1363 to 1328 BC, boldly asserted independence from neighboring powers and began actively intervening in regional politics. In diplomatic correspondence with Egyptian pharaohs, this monarch proudly declared himself a great king, claiming equal status with other major powers, a dramatic shift from Assyria's previous position as a minor political player. Military expansion accelerated significantly under subsequent rulers. Adad-nirari and Shalmaneser extended territorial control throughout the 13th century BC, establishing provinces governed directly by appointed officials rather than through traditional vassal arrangements. While other regional powers collapsed during Bronze Age disruptions around 1200 BC, Assyria successfully weathered the storm, though experiencing temporary territorial contraction. A true turning point emerged during Tiglath-Pileser's reign, circa 1114 to 1076 BC. This exceptionally energetic ruler conducted military campaigns in all directions, north into Armenian highlands, west toward Mediterranean coastlines, east into Zagros Mountains, and south against Babylonian territory. His royal inscriptions boast of crossing the Euphrates River 28 times to fight western enemies and hunting lions as royal sport, establishing twin motifs that would characterize Assyrian kingship for centuries, warrior and hunter. Following Tiglath-Pileser's death, Assyria entered an extended contraction period lasting nearly 2 centuries. External pressures from Aramean tribal groups combined with internal succession problems to significantly limit territorial control. However, even during this reduced power phase, key institutions and cultural elements supporting later imperial growth continued developing systematically. The foundations for extraordinary imperial expansion were methodically laid during the 9th century BC. 3 rulers stand out as architects of Assyrian resurgence: Ashurnasirpal II, Shalmaneser III, and Shamshi-Adad V. Under their visionary leadership, the mechanisms of empire were systematically developed and refined to unprecedented effectiveness. Ashurnasirpal Sostin, U-3 Niti 959 BC, established a magnificent new capital at Kalu, modern Nimrud, constructing a spectacular palace decorated with stone reliefs glorifying royal achievements. These visual narratives portraying military conquests, royal hunting expeditions, and religious ceremonies created powerful propaganda tools that subsequent rulers would expand dramatically. The inauguration of this palace complex was celebrated with an elaborate banquet, reportedly hosting 69,574 guests over 10 consecutive days, an extraordinary display of wealth and organizational capacity that impressed visitors from across the known world. Military innovations transformed the Assyrian army into a virtually unstoppable force. Iron weapons, having replaced bronze, provided decisive technological advantages over enemies still using older materials. Specialized military units, charioteers, cavalry, archers, and siege engineers operated in perfectly coordinated fashion under centralized command structures. A professional soldier corps was supplemented by seasonal conscripts and auxiliary forces from subject territories. Logistics received particular attention, with carefully planned supply chains supporting extended operations in distant regions previously considered unreachable. Administrative systems matched military sophistication in their complexity and effectiveness. Conquered territories were systematically organized into provinces, governed by appointed officials answerable directly to the king. Local nobles from newly integrated regions might be incorporated into the imperial structure, but their sons were often brought to the Assyrian capital for education, and as hostages ensuring their father's continued loyalty. Sophisticated road networks, strategically positioned way stations, and efficient messenger systems facilitated rapid communication throughout the expansive realm. Perhaps most notoriously, Assyria employed calculated terror as a deliberate political instrument. Royal inscriptions and palace reliefs explicitly portrayed extreme punishments inflicted upon rebels, flaying, impalement, and mass executions displayed for maximum psychological impact. Cities daring to resist faced complete annihilation, their populations systematically deported to distant empire regions. While undoubtedly exaggerated for propaganda purposes, these documented accounts reflect a deliberate psychological warfare strategy designed to discourage potential resistance before it could organize. The empire expanded dramatically under Tiglath-Pileser III, 745–727 BC, a usurper who seized the throne and implemented sweeping governmental reforms. He completely reorganized the provincial administration, breaking larger territories into smaller manageable units to prevent governors from accumulating excessive power that might challenge central authority. He significantly expanded mass deportation practices, relocating conquered populations throughout empire territories to systematically disrupt local identities and resistance potential. He also fundamentally reformed military structures, creating larger standing armies less dependent on unreliable seasonal conscripts. Under Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors, particularly Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Esarhaddon, the empire achieved unprecedented territorial size, eventually encompassing most of the Middle East from western Iran to central Egypt, from the Persian Gulf to central Anatolia. This vast territory incorporated diverse environments, economic systems, and population groups, presenting enormous administrative challenges that tested imperial capabilities to their limits. The complex relationship between Assyria and Babylon perfectly illustrates the evolution of imperial strategy over time. Early Assyrian monarchs treated Babylon with considerable respect due to its ancient cultural prestige and religious significance. Tiglath-Pileser III adopted traditional approaches, being crowned separately as Babylon's king under a different throne name. His son Shalmaneser I maintained this diplomatic practice. When Sargon II usurped the throne in 722 BC, he continued the dual monarchy approach, recognizing Babylonian sensitivities. However, his son Sennacherib grew increasingly frustrated with repeated Babylonian rebellions supported by Elam. After suppressing multiple costly uprisings, Sennacherib lost patience in 689 BC and ordered Babylon's complete destruction, a shocking decision given the city's extraordinary religious and cultural significance throughout the region. Irrigation systems were demolished, sacred temples razed, and divine statues carried off to Assyria as war trophies. Most sacrilegiously, Marduk's sacred image, Babylon's patron deity, was held hostage in Assyria, preventing proper religious ceremonies from being conducted. This radical approach proved catastrophically counterproductive, generating religious horror throughout the region and within Assyria itself. Sennacherib's assassination in 681 BC Sidi reportedly, while praying in a temple, was widely interpreted as divine punishment for his sacrilege against Babylon's sanctity. His son Esarhaddon immediately reversed this disastrous policy, ordering Babylon's complete reconstruction as one of his first royal acts. This pragmatic ruler recognized that ideological respect and religious accommodation could be far more effective than brutality in maintaining long-term imperial control. Esarhaddon's inscriptions emphasize his role as restorer and builder rather than destroyer, carefully maintaining distinct cultural identities for Assyria and Babylonia while keeping both under unified control. Esarhaddon also accomplished what his predecessors had attempted without success, the conquest of Egypt. In 671 BC, Assyrian forces captured Memphis, ancient capital of Lower Egypt, establishing control over the fertile Nile Delta region. This striking achievement extended Assyrian power to its greatest territorial extent, creating a genuinely multi-continental empire. The final major Assyrian ruler, Ashurbanipal, 668–627 BC, presided over the empire during its cultural and territorial zenith. Unusually for an Assyrian king, he boasted of literacy and scholarly abilities alongside traditional military prowess. Under his patronage, Nineveh's library systematically collected texts from throughout Mesopotamia, preserving literary, religious, scientific, and historical works on approximately 30,000 clay tablets, an invaluable collection that ironically was preserved for modern discovery precisely because of the violent destruction that would soon engulf the Assyrian capitals. Despite outward appearances of invincibility, the massive empire faced mounting structural problems that threatened its sustainability. Controlling such vast territory required enormous military and administrative resources that strained imperial capabilities. Constant warfare, though generating plunder and tribute, severely strained manpower and economic sustainability. Subject populations, repeatedly relocated and exploited, harbored deep resentment toward Assyrian rule that would eventually explode into coordinated rebellion. The system maintained momentum under Ashurbanipal's strong leadership, but his death around 627 BC revealed the dangerous fragility beneath the impressive imperial facade. Succession disputes weakened central authority, precisely when external threats were mounting ominously. Babylon, under a Chaldean dynasty led by Nabopolassar, declared independence in 626 BC. Initially, this revolt appeared to be merely another periodic Babylonian rebellion that Assyrian forces had suppressed numerous times before. However, Nabopolassar proved an exceptionally determined and capable leader. Even more dangerously for Assyria, he formed a strategic alliance with the Medes and Iranian people who had developed a formidable kingdom in the Zagros Mountains. This Babylonian-Median alliance attacked the Assyrian heartland directly, targeting the great cities that had served as imperial capitals. Ashur fell in 614 BC, followed by Nineveh in 612 BC after a devastating 3-month siege. The magnificent palaces and temples were systematically put to the torch, their walls toppled, their accumulated treasures looted or destroyed. A remnant Assyrian court established at Haran held out briefly, but by 609 BC, Assyrian independence had been completely extinguished. The fall of Assyria proved as dramatic as its rise. An empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries vanished with such finality that within 2 generations, the great capital cities lay abandoned, their once magnificent buildings reduced to overgrown archaeological mounds. The prophet Nahum's exultant description of Nineveh's fall mirrors woe to the city of blood, full of lies, reflected the deep hatred Assyria's imperial practices had generated among subject peoples throughout the region. Yet even in destruction, Assyria left an enduring legacy that would influence imperial development for millennia. The sophisticated imperial systems developed to control vast territories provided essential models for subsequent empires. The extensive network of roads, administrative centers, and communication systems created military and economic integration across previously fragmented regions. The practice of gathering and preserving knowledge from throughout the empire saved countless cultural and literary works for posterity. Perhaps most importantly, the Assyrian Empire represented the first successful attempt to create a genuinely international political order, encompassing numerous peoples, languages, and cultural traditions under unified governance, a complex achievement despite the brutality of its methods. From Assyrian domination's ashes arose a revitalized Babylonian state that would create one final magnificent chapter in Mesopotamian civilization. The Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire, though lasting less than a century, achieved such extraordinary cultural splendor and historical significance that it permanently secured Babylon's place in the world's imagination. The foundation for this renaissance was systematically laid by Nabopolassar, a leader from Chaldean tribal groups that had settled in southern Mesopotamia over preceding generations. Taking advantage of Assyria's weakening grip, he declared independence in 626 BC and gradually consolidated control over southern territories. His strategic alliance with the Medes provided essential military strength needed to challenge Assyrian dominance directly, leading to Nineveh's dramatic fall in 612 BC. With Assyria's collapse, Nabopolassar faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding a state that had experienced centuries of foreign domination. He initiated ambitious reconstruction projects in major cities, reorganized administrative systems, and carefully balanced competing interests among traditional Babylonian urban elites and his own Chaldean tribal supporters. By his death in 605 BC, he had established a stable foundation upon which his son would build an extraordinary legacy. That son, Nebuchadnezzar II, would become this era's defining figure, a monarch whose 43-year reign transformed Babylon into the most magnificent city in the ancient world. Taking the throne upon his father's death, the young king had already demonstrated exceptional military prowess as crown prince, leading armies against Egyptian forces attempting to fill the vacuum left by Assyria's dramatic fall. Nebuchadnezzar's initial military campaigns systematically secured western territories of the former Assyrian Empire, extending Babylonian dominance through Syria and Palestine to Egyptian frontier boundaries. His fateful siege of Jerusalem in 597 BC, followed by an even more devastating conquest in 587 BC, resulted in the Hebrew temple's destruction and the exile of Judean elite to Babylon. This pivotal event in Jewish history was described poignantly in biblical texts and immortalized in the famous lines, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." Having secured his territorial borders through decisive military action, Nebuchadnezzar redirected his primary focus toward internal development and monumental construction projects. The enormous wealth flowing into imperial coffers from tribute payments, international trade, and agricultural production funded an extraordinarily ambitious building program that would transform Babylon into an undisputed wonder of the ancient world. The city possessed ancient roots, stretching back nearly 2 millennia, but Nebuchadnezzar reimagined it on an absolutely unprecedented scale. Massive new defensive walls, mice reportedly, so thick that 4-horse chariots could turn around on their tops, encircled an urban expanse covering more than 850 hectares. An intricate network of canals and levees managed water flow from the Euphrates River, which flowed directly through the city's heart. Wide processional boulevards paved with gleaming limestone and decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting lions, dragons, and bulls connected major religious and administrative centers throughout the metropolis. Most spectacular of all stood the temple complex dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. At its center rose the ziggurat to Menanke, ascending in 7-colored tiers to heights exceeding 90 meters, the likely inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel legend. Beside this architectural marvel stood Asagila, the main temple housing Marduk's golden statue, alongside treasures accumulated from conquered regions throughout the empire. The royal palace complex matched these temples in sheer grandeur and sophistication. Multiple courtyards, elaborate audience halls, and administrative buildings formed a virtual city within the city. Here, according to Greek historical traditions, Nebuchadnezzar constructed the legendary Hanging Gardens irrigated terraces filled with exotic plants and trees, supposedly built to comfort his Median wife who missed the lush greenery of her mountainous homeland. While archaeological evidence for these gardens remains frustratingly elusive, the very fact that they became recognized as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world demonstrates Babylon's powerful grip on subsequent civilizations' collective imagination. The annual New Year's festival, Akitu, represented the absolute pinnacle of Babylonian religious and political theater. During this elaborate 11-day celebration, the creation epic Enuma Elish was formally recited, recounting Marduk's victory over primordial chaos and establishment of cosmic order. The reigning king played a central ritual role, symbolically subordinating his earthly authority to divine power. In a dramatic ceremony, the high priest would strike the monarch's face and force him to kneel before Marduk's statue, a ritual humiliation demonstrating that even the most powerful earthly ruler served at divine pleasure. Beyond the magnificent capital, Nebuchadnezzar undertook extensive infrastructure projects throughout his vast realm. Irrigation systems were systematically expanded and renovated, dramatically increasing agricultural productivity across fertile regions. Temples in ancient religious centers like Uruk and Sippar were meticulously restored to their former glory. Trade routes were secured with strategic military outposts and way stations, ensuring safe passage for merchants. The overall effect created a remarkable revitalization of Mesopotamian economic and cultural life following the disruptions of the later Assyrian period. Intellectually, the Neo-Babylonian period witnessed significant achievements, particularly in astronomical sciences. Court scholars refined observational techniques developed over previous centuries, creating increasingly accurate methods for predicting celestial events. The motivation remained primarily religious, some understanding divine intentions through celestial omens, but the mathematical sophistication involved laid crucial foundations for later scientific astronomy that would influence Greek and Islamic scholars. Literary culture flourished magnificently during this Renaissance. Scribal schools maintained ancient texts while creating innovative new compositions. The Babylonian creation epic reached its final definitive form during this period, synthesizing older traditions into a coherent theological statement about divine kingship and cosmic order. Historical texts meticulously recorded royal achievements, while practical manuals transmitted specialized knowledge in fields ranging from medicine to advanced engineering. Extensive administrative records painted a detailed picture of a complex economic system, combining state-managed resources with thriving private enterprise. Temple and palace organizations controlled vast agricultural estates, manufacturing workshops, and international trade operations. Simultaneously, private families conducted independent businesses, with some developing into powerful banking houses that financed commercial ventures and agricultural development through sophisticated credit arrangements. Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BC revealed a hidden weakness in the seemingly mighty empire: the absence of institutional structures capable of managing succession and maintaining stability beyond a dominant personality's lifetime. His son Amel-Marduk, Evil Merodach, in biblical sources ruled briefly before being overthrown by Neriglissar, a military officer who had married into the royal family. After Neriglissar's short reign, his young son was quickly deposed in favor of Nabonidus, whose relationship to the royal family remains historically unclear. This unusual figure would become the last native ruler of independent Babylon, presiding over its final years with policies that generated increasing internal opposition. Nabonidus demonstrated particular devotion to Sin, the moon god, elevating this deity's status in ways that deeply disturbed the powerful priests of Marduk, who had enjoyed premier status under previous rulers. Even more controversially, Nabonidus spent 10 years of his 17-year reign in the Arabian oasis of Timur, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent in Babylon. The reasons for this extraordinary absence from the capital remain hotly debated among historians. Perhaps commercial interests, religious motivations, or health concerns played decisive roles. Whatever the explanation, this unprecedented arrangement significantly weakened central authority and alienated key constituencies within Babylonian society. The priests of Marduk, aristocratic families and urban elites, grew increasingly dissatisfied with what they perceived as religious deviation and neglect of traditional ceremonies that had maintained social cohesion for centuries. Meanwhile, a formidable new power was rising beyond the empire's eastern borders. The Persians, led by Cyrus II, later called the Great, had been systematically consolidating control over the Iranian plateau, overthrowing their former Median overlords and creating a formidable new kingdom threatening Babylonian interests. In 539 BC, Persian forces approached Babylon after defeating outlying garrison forces. The biblical account of the city's fall, Falseus featuring the famous writing on the wall, interpreted by the prophet Daniel Thal, suggests a night of feasting and revelry interrupted by enemy intrusion. Archaeological evidence and contemporary Persian sources tell a remarkably different story. Babylon surrendered with minimal resistance, and Cyrus entered the city as a respectful liberator rather than a destructive conqueror. His famous cylinder inscription, discovered by modern archaeologists, portrays him as chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship and just governance after Nabonidus's alleged neglect. Whether through genuine divine will or calculated political strategy, this relatively peaceful transition preserved Babylon's physical splendor while definitively ending its political independence. The Neo-Babylonian Empire became a wealthy province within the even larger Persian Empire, which would establish revolutionary new paradigms for multicultural governance. Thus concluded the final chapter of truly independent Mesopotamian civilization, a remarkable journey spanning over 3 millennia, from the first settlements after the Ice Age to the last native kings of Babylon. This extraordinary legacy would continue influencing human civilization for millennia to come through legal systems, urban planning, religious concepts, astronomical knowledge, and the fundamental idea that diverse peoples could unite under common governance while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. Though Babylon would persist as a crucial administrative hub for centuries under Persian, Greek, and Parthian governance, indigenous political traditions had reached their definitive conclusion. The legacy of this brief yet brilliant Neo-Babylonian Renaissance would endure powerfully, however, not merely in archaeological remains, but in humanity's collective cultural memory. From biblical narratives chronicling exile and prophetic visions to Greek historical accounts, from the celebrated wonders of the ancient world to Babylon's enduring symbolic power in art and literature across millennia, the year 539 BC marked a pivotal transition in Mesopotamian history. Following 3,000 years of indigenous rule, punctuated by occasional outside invasions, the region between the rivers would now become an integral part of a vast multicultural empire centered beyond its traditional boundaries. This monumental transformation began not through violent destruction, but via a remarkably peaceful power transfer that preserved Babylon's physical magnificence while forever altering its political status. The agent of this historic change was Cyrus II of Persia, later acclaimed the Great, a ruler whose humble origins seemed far from promising for world historical impact. The Persians had long existed as scattered semi-nomadic tribes throughout the southern Zagros Mountains and Iranian Plateau, remaining subordinate to more powerful neighbors. Under the leadership of Cyrus's ancestors, the Achaemenid clan had established a modest kingdom centered on Anshan in southwestern Iran, nominally subject to Median overlordship. Cyrus's ascent to power began with his dramatic overthrow of the Median Empire around 550 BC. According to Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus had been raised in secrecy after his maternal grandfather, Median king Astyages, dreamed that his grandson would eventually usurp him. Despite attempts to eliminate this perceived threat, the young man survived to fulfill the prophecy, overthrowing his grandfather and claiming Median territories. With stunning rapidity, Cyrus transformed this initial success into campaigns of unprecedented conquest. Within a single decade, he gained control over most of Western Asia, incorporating the prosperous kingdom of Lydia in Anatolia, the Greek cities along the Ionian coast, and various regions throughout the Iranian plateau. His military achievements brilliantly combined innovative tactical approaches with strategic flexibility. Perhaps his most distinctive characteristic was his revolutionary approach toward conquered peoples. Unlike earlier conquerors who imposed their cultural and religious practices while brutally suppressing local traditions, Cyrus developed groundbreaking policies of cultural and religious tolerance. Conquered populations retained their cherished customs, local administrative systems, and religious practices. Persian imperial strategy focused on ensuring loyalty and tribute flow, while otherwise minimizing disruption to existing local societies. As this formidable new power expanded westward, the last Neo-Babylonian king Nabonidus found himself increasingly isolated, both politically and militarily. Having spent a decade in the Arabian oasis of Timur, for reasons that remain historically debated, Nabonidus had returned to Babylon to discover his religious policies and governing approach sharply criticized by influential groups within society. His particular devotion to Sin, the moon god, had alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, traditionally Babylon's patron deity. His apparent neglect of certain religious festivals, particularly the crucial New Year's celebration, generated theological concerns about cosmic order among the population. Meanwhile, various conquered peoples within the Babylonian realm harbored deep resentments over restrictive policies, creating potential allies for any invader, promising more tolerant rule. As Persian forces approached Babylonian territory in 539 BC, they encountered a profoundly divided society. Some frontier garrisons offered fierce resistance, while others quickly surrendered without fighting. Nabonidus gathered troops to meet this existential threat, but the expected decisive battle never materialized. Instead, Persian forces under Cyrus's general Ugbaru conducted a brilliant strategic maneuver, diverting river waters to lower the Euphrates sufficiently for troops to enter Babylon beneath its massive defensive walls. The Nabonidus Chronicle, a contemporary Babylonian text, describes the city's fall in remarkably undramatic terms. In the month of Tishri, when Cyrus attacked the army of Akkad in Opis on the Tigris, the inhabitants of Akkad revolted, but he massacred the confused inhabitants. The 14th day, Sippar was seized without battle. Nabonidus fled. The 16th day, Ugbaru, governor of Gutium, and the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. Afterward, Nabonidus was arrested in Babylon when he returned. This account, with its repeated emphasis on without battle, contrasts sharply with the catastrophic destructions that had ended many previous Mesopotamian regimes. The famous biblical account in the book of Daniel, featuring the disembodied hand writing mysterious words on the palace wall during Belshazzar's feast, adds dramatic literary elements, but similarly emphasizes the city's fall without significant resistance. Cyrus himself arrived in Babylon shortly after its capture and implemented policies that would define Persian imperial governance for centuries. Rather than positioning himself as a foreign conqueror, he claimed traditional Babylonian royal titles and portrayed himself as the legitimate successor to the ancient throne, chosen by Marduk to restore proper religious observance and just rule after Nabonidus's alleged failures. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay barrel inscribed with the official Persian version of these events, represents one of history's earliest declarations of human rights policies. In this remarkable document, Cyrus describes his peaceful entry into Babylon, his genuine concern for the city's well-being, and most significantly, his policy of allowing displaced peoples to return to their homelands and rebuild their religious institutions. This last policy held particular significance for the Jewish community. The biblical books of Ezra and Chronicles record that Cyrus issued a specific decree allowing Jewish exiles in Babylon to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple with expenses paid from the royal treasury. While only a portion of the exiles chose to return, this policy established Cyrus as a divinely appointed liberator in Jewish tradition, with the prophet Isaiah even referring to him as God's anointed one, Messiah. For Babylon itself, the Persian conquest marked the beginning of a new status, no longer serving as an imperial capital, but functioning as a wealthy provincial center within a far larger political entity. The city retained its architectural splendor, religious importance, and economic vitality. Its sophisticated administrative systems and scribal traditions continued, now serving Persian imperial needs. Many Babylonian elites discovered places within the new imperial administration, applying their considerable skills in service to their new overlords. The Persian Empire, created by Cyrus and expanded by his successors, represented an entirely new model of imperial organization, divided into provinces called satrapies, each under an appointed governor, satrap. This system balanced central control with local autonomy in ways that previous empires had never achieved. This governmental innovation would influence imperial administration throughout the ancient world and beyond, establishing precedents for multicultural governance that continue influencing political thought today. The conquest of Babylon in 539 BC thus marked more than simply another imperial transition. It represented the end of Mesopotamian political independence and the beginning of a new era in world history, one characterized by vast multicultural empires that would dominate international politics for centuries. Yet, the cultural achievements of ancient Mesopotamia, from the world's first cities and writing systems, to sophisticated legal codes and astronomical observations, would continue influencing human civilization long after the last native kings had vanished into history. Babylon's legacy lived on not in political power, but in the fundamental innovations that had shaped human society itself. Typically selected from Persian aristocracy, the empire achieved masterful balance between central authority and local autonomy. A unified imperial administrative language, Aramaic standardized currency systems, and an impressive road network facilitated effective governance across unprecedented distances. Religious policy remained faithful to Cyrus's original enlightened approach. Local religious cults and traditional practices continued without governmental interference, while Persian rulers actively participated in customary ceremonies when visiting major centers like Babylon. The Achaemenid monarchs themselves practiced Zoroastrianism and Iranian faith, emphasizing the cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, but deliberately avoided imposing this religion upon subject peoples. Under Persian governance, Mesopotamia experienced remarkably stable administration for 2 full centuries. The region's exceptional agricultural productivity and commercial wealth ranked it among the empire's most valuable provinces. Babylonian astronomical knowledge, administrative expertise, and cultural traditions significantly influenced Persian imperial practices, while Persian military protection and inclusion within an empire stretching from the Indus to the Mediterranean created unprecedented opportunities for merchants and government officials. Occasional rebellions did occur, particularly during succession disputes within the Achaemenid dynasty. Babylon revolted twice during Darius' troubled accession around 522 BC, and again following Xerxes' death in 465 BC. These uprisings were suppressed with varying degrees of severity, but never resulted in the wholesale destruction that had characterized earlier. Assyrian responses to rebellion. The Achaemenid dynasty ruled Mesopotamia until 331 BC, when Alexander the Great defeated the last Persian king Darius III and claimed the vast empire for himself. With his victory, Hellenistic culture would be introduced to the ancient land between the rivers, beginning yet another transformative chapter in its extensive history. However, the pivotal moment in this transition had occurred 2 centuries earlier, when Cyrus the Great entered Babylon and established a revolutionary paradigm of multicultural empire that would influence political thinking for millennia to come. The Persian conquest marked the definitive end of truly independent Mesopotamian political systems, but paradoxically ensured the preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian cultural achievements by incorporating rather than destroying local traditions. The Persian Empire created ideal conditions where ancient knowledge could be maintained and eventually transmitted to emerging civilizations, ensuring that the legacy of the land between the rivers would endure long after its political independence had passed into history. The Persian conquest in 539 BC marked the beginning of a long twilight for the ancient civilization between the rivers. While Mesopotamian cities, particularly Babylon, would continue existing for many centuries, some settlements in the region have maintained continuous habitation into the modern era minna. The distinctive cultural tradition that had developed over 3 millennia underwent gradual transformation under successive waves of foreign rule. The Persian period, spanning 539 to 331 BC, treated Mesopotamian traditions with considerable respect. Achaemenid kings participated in traditional Babylonian religious ceremonies when visiting the city, maintained ancient temples, and incorporated local elites into their administrative systems. Babylonian astronomical knowledge, with its sophisticated mathematical foundations, influenced Persian understanding of cosmic order. Cultural continuity remained remarkably strong during these 2 centuries, even as political independence had been permanently lost. A more dramatic shift began with Alexander the Great's arrival, who defeated Persian forces under Darius III in 331 BC. After this victory, the Macedonian conqueror entered Babylon in triumph, receiving enthusiastic welcome from a population perhaps hoping for liberation from Persian rule. Alexander apparently appreciated the city's extraordinary historical importance. He planned making Babylon the capital of his new Eastern Empire and began ambitious restoration projects for its temples and palaces. However, Alexander's premature death in 323 BC in Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Babylon itself triggered prolonged power struggles among his generals. This conflict eventually resulted in Mesopotamia falling under Seleucus's control, who established what historians call the Seleucid Empire, a vast realm stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Rather than ruling from Babylon, Seleucus founded a new capital, Seleucia on the Tigris, approximately 90 kilometers north of the ancient city. This new Greek-style polis, with its grid-planned streets, theatres, gymnasiums, and administrative centres, represented a deliberate attempt to implant Hellenistic culture in the ancient land's heart. Many Babylon residents gradually relocated to the new city, drawn by economic opportunities and tax incentives, beginning slow decline in the ancient capital's population and importance. Under Seleucid rule, complex cultural fusion began developing. Greek became the administrative language, and Greek architectural styles, artistic conventions, and religious practices were introduced throughout the region. Simultaneously, traditional Mesopotamian temples continued operating. Cuneiform writing persisted for religious and astronomical texts, and ancient literary works were still copied and studied in specialized scribal centers. This Greco-Mesopotamian synthesis is particularly evident in the period's intellectual developments. Babylonian astronomical traditions, with their emphasis on mathematical prediction of celestial movements, influenced Greek theoretical models of the cosmos. Simultaneously, Greek philosophical approaches affected how Babylonian scholars interpreted their ancient traditions. Berossus, a Babylonian priest, composed a Greek-language history of his homeland for Seleucid ruler Antiochus I, translating Mesopotamian traditions into forms comprehensible to Hellenistic audiences. The Hellenistic era in Mesopotamia witnessed gradual religious transformations as well. Traditional temple cults continued, but with decreasing state support compared to previous eras. Greek deities were sometimes identified with Mesopotamian counterparts: Zeus with Marduk, Apollo with Nabu, Artemis with Ishtar, creating syncretistic worship patterns. Simultaneously, new religious movements including Eastern mystery cults, philosophical schools, and astral religions gained adherents in the region's cosmopolitan cities. Political control shifted again during the late Seleucid period. As the empire weakened through internal dynastic conflicts and external pressures, the Parthians, an Iranian people from Central Asia, gradually expanded westward, capturing eastern provinces of the Seleucid realm and eventually taking Mesopotamia itself around 141 BC. Their arrival marked another stage in the region's transformation. The Parthian period represented partial return to Eastern cultural patterns after the Hellenistic interlude. While Greek remained an important administrative and cultural language, Aramaic gained increasing prominence, and Iranian cultural elements became more visible in art and royal ideology. The Parthians followed decentralized governing approaches, allowing considerable autonomy to local authorities, including Greek-style city councils and traditional temple administrations. During this era, Babylon continued its slow decline. Though still inhabited and maintaining some religious significance, it had been eclipsed by newer urban centers. Seleucia on the Tigris flourished as the region's primary city, with Ctesiphon across the river emerging as the Parthian administrative center. Uruk, one of the oldest Mesopotamian cities, maintained surprising vitality, with its main temple complex, dedicated to Ishtar, remaining active well into the Parthian period. Culturally, the Parthian era witnessed the final phases of cuneiform writing, which had been Mesopotamia's primary script for over 3,000 years. The latest known cuneiform astronomical text dates to 75 AD, while the latest precisely dated literary text comes from 35 BC. This gradual abandonment of the ancient writing system marked a decisive break in cultural continuity. Though many Mesopotamian traditions continued in translated forms or through oral transmission, the direct link to the earliest civilizational achievements had been severed. Religious developments during this period included Judaism's spread throughout Mesopotamia, with important communities developing in major cities. The Babylonian Jewish community, descended from those who had remained after the Persian authorized return to Jerusalem, became increasingly influential in Jewish religious thought. The beginnings of what would later develop into the Babylonian Talmud, a massive collection of rabbinic discussions on Jewish law and ethics, took shape during these centuries. And so the story of ancient Mesopotamia draws to its close, not with dramatic destruction, but with gradual transformation and absorption into larger cultural currents. The land between the rivers had given humanity its first cities, first writing systems, first law codes, and countless other foundational innovations. Though political independence had ended in 539 BC, the cultural legacy would prove immortal, influencing every subsequent civilization and continuing to shape human society thousands of years later. The final major imperial transition occurred when the Sasanian Persians overthrew Parthian rule in 224 AD, establishing a more centralized and assertive Iranian state under Sasanian governance. 224 might 651 AD throughout Mesopotamia. Zoroastrianism received unprecedented state support, occasionally resulting in significant pressure on other religious communities throughout the region. Administrative systems became increasingly hierarchical, with elevated tax demands and labor obligations placed upon the population. Ctesiphon reached its absolute peak as one of the world's greatest cities during this period, serving as the winter capital of the mighty Sasanian Empire. Its legendary palace, featuring an enormous vaulted hall, stood as an architectural marvel that would profoundly influence Islamic building traditions centuries later. Other Mesopotamian cities continued functioning, though often at considerably reduced size compared to earlier golden eras. The cultural landscape during these final centuries of pre-Islamic Mesopotamia was extraordinarily diverse and complex. Mandaeans practiced their distinctive baptismal religion in southern marshlands. Manichaean missionaries spread their dualistic faith from Mesopotamian bases throughout the known world. Eastern Christianity established important centers, with the Church of the East, often called Nestorian by outsiders, developing distinctive theological traditions and missionary networks reaching as far as distant China. Jewish scholarly communities in Mesopotamia produced the Babylonian Talmud, completed around 500 AD, which would become the most authoritative legal and ethical compilation in Rabbinic Judaism. Simultaneously in dwindling temples, the last priests maintaining ancient Mesopotamian religious traditions continued their increasingly isolated practices, their numbers diminishing with each passing generation until these ancient faiths finally vanished completely. This remarkably diverse religious landscape was transformed once again by the Arab-Islamic conquests of the 630s and 640s. After defeating Sasanian forces in the decisive Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 AD, Arab armies gained complete control of Mesopotamia, which would become the heartland of the Abbasid Caliphate when Baghdad was founded in 762 AD. This new imperial center was built just 30 kilometers from the ruins of ancient Ctesiphon, continuing the historical pattern of successive capitals rising near the remains of their predecessors. Under Islamic rule, the region is now increasingly called Iraq from the Persian Erik, referring to the lands, experienced remarkable cultural revitalization, but within an entirely different civilizational tradition. The ancient gods of Sumer and Akkad had been largely forgotten by this time. Cuneiform writing had been completely abandoned. The ziggurats and temples had crumbled to ruins or been rebuilt as mosques and palaces. Yet subtle continuities persisted beneath the surface of these profound transformations. Astronomical and mathematical knowledge developed over millennia in Mesopotamia significantly influenced early Islamic science. Irrigation techniques refined since Sumerian times continued sustaining agricultural productivity. Administrative practices and imperial ideologies transmitted through successive empires informed Islamic governance approaches. Countless folk beliefs, literary motifs, and cultural practices continued in adapted forms more as their ancient origins forgotten, but their influence persistent and powerful. The final disappearance of recognizably Mesopotamian cultural traditions is impossible to date precisely. Like a mighty river flowing into vast marshlands, the distinctive civilization that had begun at Eridu and Uruk in the 4th millennium BC gradually dissipated, its waters mixing with countless other cultural streams to nourish newer civilizational growth. Elements of Mesopotamian heritage persisted in Jewish communities, in astronomical knowledge, in irrigation practices, and in countless unrecognized influences on successor civilizations spanning the globe. Modern archaeological excavations beginning in the 19th century gradually revealed the forgotten splendor of ancient Mesopotamia. Cuneiform writing was painstakingly deciphered, ziggurats systematically excavated, and royal palaces unearthed from beneath centuries of accumulated soil and debris. The recognition that this region had produced the world's first cities, earliest writing systems, and pioneering legal codes completely transformed humanity's understanding of its own origins and developmental trajectory. Today, the physical legacy of ancient Mesopotamia remains embedded in the landscape of modern Iraq and Syria, in archaeological sites, museum collections worldwide, and the genetic and cultural heritage of contemporary inhabitants. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy lies in foundational concepts that shaped all subsequent civilizations. The organization of urban communities, the development of writing for record-keeping and literature, the codification of laws, the practice of mathematics and astronomy, and the creation of complex religious systems seeking to explain humanity's place in the cosmos. All these fundamental innovations trace their origins to the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. The story of ancient Mesopotamia thus ends not with a dramatic conclusion, but with gradual transformation and diffusion of influence, the transition from direct cultural continuity to indirect legacy, from lived tradition to recovered memory. This pattern reflects the fundamental nature of human civilization itself, not discrete chapters with clear beginnings and endings, but an ongoing flow of influence and adaptation, with each generation building upon, modifying, and sometimes rediscovering the achievements of those who came before. As our journey through Mesopotamia's extensive history draws to a close, we can now step back and contemplate the extraordinary legacy this civilization bestowed upon human development. The achievements that emerge from the land between the rivers continue influencing our world today in ways both obvious and subtle, recognized and forgotten. Writing Monas, perhaps the most revolutionary technology in human history, found its first systematic expression in the simple clay tokens and pictographs of Uruk around 3400 BC. What began as a practical method for recording agricultural products and commercial transactions gradually evolved into a flexible system capable of expressing abstract thoughts, preserving literary masterpieces, codifying laws, and transmitting knowledge across generations. The cuneiform writing developed in Mesopotamia would influence or inspire many subsequent scripts, and the very concept of written communication would spread from this initial source to transform human societies worldwide. The organization of urban communities, with their specialized labor, civic infrastructure, and complex social hierarchies, crystallized in the early cities of Sumer. Here, humanity first grappled with problems still familiar today: how to govern dense populations, manage shared resources, regulate economic activities, and maintain social order amid competing interests. Mathematics and astronomy, driven initially by practical needs for land measurement, architectural planning, and calendar development, reached sophisticated levels in Mesopotamian scholarly traditions. The sexagesimal system developed by Sumerian administrators, based on units of 60 time, continues shaping how we measure time and angular geometry, even in our digital age. Every time we speak of 60 seconds in a minute, or 360 degrees in a circle, we echo calculations made by priests and scribes who observed the stars from Mesopotamian temple platforms thousands of years ago. Legal concepts fundamental to orderly society found early formal expression in Mesopotamian law codes. From Ur-Nammu to Hammurabi, these collections establish principles of justice, procedures for resolving disputes, standards for commercial transactions, and protections for various social classes. Religious and mythological frameworks developed in Mesopotamia influenced subsequent theological thinking throughout the Middle East and beyond. The flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh bears striking parallels to later biblical accounts. Concepts of divine justice, cosmic order versus chaos, and humanity's relationship with supernatural forces found expression in Mesopotamian religious texts that would echo through later faith traditions. Technological innovations from this ancient land transformed daily life and economic possibilities. Irrigation systems developed by Sumerian farmers allowed agriculture to flourish in semi-arid environments, dramatically increasing food production. The potter's wheel revolutionized ceramic manufacturing. Advances in metallurgy progressed from simple copper tools to sophisticated bronze alloys. Literary forms exploring fundamental human questions emerged in the world's earliest known creative texts. The Epic of Gilgamesh confronts mortality, friendship, and the search for meaning in the face of inevitable death. Wisdom literature offered reflections on justice and suffering that would find parallels in later works like the biblical Book of Job. Perhaps most profoundly, Mesopotamia demonstrated humanity's capacity for cumulative cultural achievement, the ability to build upon previous generations' discoveries, to preserve and transmit knowledge, to adapt traditional practices to new circumstances, and to create institutions outlasting individual lifespans. When we trace these influences, we must acknowledge the complex nature of cultural transmission. The relationship between ancient Mesopotamia and contemporary society resembles a mighty river with countless tributaries and distributaries some channels maintaining direct connection, others dividing and rejoining through complex networks. The waters that first gathered in the floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates have long since mingled with countless other streams, yet they remain part of the great flow of human civilization that continues to this day. The fundamental challenges of human existence remain as pressing today as they were for the inhabitants of Uruk or Babylon Morn, and their pioneering solutions continue lighting our path forward into an unknown but promising future. The Chronicle of Mesopotamia teaches us that civilization represents not a possession, but an evolving process, not a final achievement, but a continuous endeavor. This extraordinary journey commenced long before any contemporary person drew breath, and will persist long after we have all returned to Earth's embrace. We stand as inheritors of traditions, breakthrough innovations, and accumulated wisdom spanning thousands of years, with roots extending back to those pioneering farmers who established communities beside ancient waterways and initiated humanity's magnificent experiment in creating something greater and more lasting than individual mortal existence. As we complete our exploration through ancient Mesopotamia's remarkable saga, we can truly appreciate how these distant ancestors' race, despite the immense temporal chasm separating our era's race, confronted challenges instantly recognizable to our modern perspectives and sensibilities. Through their spectacular victories and devastating defeats, their profound wisdom and glaring blindness, their inspiring courage and shocking brutality, we discover reflections of our own essential humanity. This reminds us that while civilization's specific manifestations transform dramatically across millennia, the fundamental human experiences of love and terror, amazement and doubt, innovation and devastation remain remarkably unchanged throughout history. Mesopotamia's enduring legacy continues living within our minutes and hours, within our written communications, within our metropolitan centers and legal frameworks, within our spiritual concepts and scientific investigations, and within our perpetual struggle to discover purpose and create magnificence in a world that, like the unpredictable flooding of those ancient rivers, remains eternally shifting and perpetually demanding. From the first settlements emerging after the Ice Age's retreat to the final native monarchs of Babylon, from humanity's earliest writing systems to sophisticated astronomical calculations, from primitive agricultural communities to vast multicultural empires, these extraordinary civilizations demonstrated that human beings possess unlimited potential to transcend their individual limitations and create lasting contributions to our shared heritage. The waters of the Tigris and Euphrates may have changed course countless times over 5 millennia, but the cultural currents they set in motion continue flowing through every aspect of modern existence. Every time we organize our cities, codify our laws, record our thoughts, or contemplate our place in the universe, we participate in the ongoing story that began in those fertile plains between the rivers. Mesopotamia's greatest lesson echoes across the ages, that civilization requires constant renewal, that knowledge must be preserved and transmitted, that diverse peoples can unite while maintaining their unique identities, and that the human spirit's capacity for creativity, innovation, and transcendence remains our species' most precious and enduring characteristic.